Welcome to the Q&As of Quantitative Methods. We are at session 3. And so tonight what we're going to do, if you were not here with us last time, we talked about basic stats and we had such a great and robust discussion. We ran out of time. So we're going to pick up where we left off and talk a little bit about the chi-square test. And then we have a guest speaker tonight who is Reem Ayouby. And so I just want to shout her out for a minute, but I'm going to give her space to introduce herself when she's taking over. And then she's going to get into some of the advanced stats because a few of you asked about that. And I'm really excited for her to show about and talk about her research. So let's go ahead and get started. In the interest of time, I am going to share my screen. Let's see. And you'll probably see a blank screen to get started, but hopefully everyone can see it. Give me a thumbs up and I'm going to put my presentation up. All right. If that will start. There we go. All right. So just ran over the agenda. We're going to have some activities tonight. So let's just jump right into it. Okay. Okay. So we're going to start off with the A/B test. So if you recall from our first session, I talked about the different types of usability testing, and then we got into how we're going to use whichever statistical test. So for A/B testing, we are going to do a chi-square test, okay? So this is an example from a study that I did I guess last year sometime. And basically what we wanted to do is we asked users to update financial aid holds, and they had, they were in one of two conditions, right? And so in this case, the null hypothesis is that there would be no difference, right, in the success of being able to, update a financial aid hold. But we have a few calculations that we need to do before running the test, and I'll run you through those. So I'm using Excel. Obviously, if we were doing this using another statistical package, it would be a lot easier. So maybe if you're interested, I can do like a class on SPSS or something like that in the future, just something to think about. But we're going to do this in Excel since most of us have access to Excel. All right. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do is you want to set up your table with frequency counts. So what you see here is just the raw data, right? Like, were they successful or were they not, right? So we have them, let's see, my thing isn't working. There we go. So we convert that raw data into frequency counts, right? So we could see how many were successful per each group and how many failed per group, okay? The next step is you want to calculate the totals for the rows and the columns, right? So if you see going across the rows, we have, the row total is 36. The column total differs, right? Success and fail. So 49 are successful, 23 failed, right? Okay. Now we're going to do a calculation, okay? So we're going to calculate what's called expected values. So in the chi-square test, we have the observed values. So the observed values is what you get in, in the test itself. And then the expected value is a calculation that we make, and we're going to compare those expected values to the observed value, okay? So how we calculate expected values, and I just did this in a new table because it just was easier, is that expected value is equal to the row total multiplied by the column total, and then you divide that by the overall total, okay? So the first case you have 36, right, which is a row total, and then the column total is 49, right? Multiply those two, and then divide that by 72, okay? Then you get 24.5, all right? I could do the same thing to figure, to complete this entire matrix, right? If I'm doing like the failed section, I would do 36 times 23 divided by 72, okay? And that's how I calculated these values. All of these are just formulas in Excel. You just plug in the formula and it just cranks it right out for us, okay? Next, you calculate the actual chi-square statistic. Okay, now I know this, when you see this equation, you're probably like, okay, I'm about to shut down. I don't really want to do all this, but I will walk you through it. So you take the observed value and then you subtract from it the expected value. Once you do that, you square it, okay? So in this case, we'll have observed value of 29, right? And then you subtract 24.5 from that, you end up getting 4.5, okay? We take that value and we square it, okay? If we square that, we get 20.25, okay? Then we divide that by that expected value, the 24.5, all right? And you get this 0.826, etc. Right? So it's easier to do this in Excel because you just build the formula in Excel, and then you could just do this for all of the values here, right? So I did that separately, and then I just sum them, right? I just add them all up, and that chi-square value is 5.17, okay? So I just apply this observed minus expected, square it, divided by expected, and I just put those in each of those cells, just copy and paste the formula, and then I just add them all up to get this 5.17, okay? And then, oh, I actually did the highlights there. Sorry about that. I was like wondering what was going on. Okay, and then I calculate what's called degrees of freedom. And this is called a 2x2 matrix because I have 2 columns and then I have 2 rows, right? So to calculate degrees of freedom, it's just the row minus 1 multiplied by the column minus 1, which is 1, right? Because I end up with 1 row, 1 column, multiply it, I get 1. And then I put this calculation into the formula bar in Excel to calculate the p-value. Remember that p-value is going to be what we compare to 0.05, right? And if it's less than 0.05, I have a significant effect or significant difference or significant relationship depending on what test I'm running, all right? So it's just this chi-squared, and you just enter it in, .dist, .rt, and then you just highlight these 2 columns. You'll see like I-18 and I-19, just highlight it, hit enter, and then it cranks out the p-value, okay? Again, obviously this is much easier in SPSS, but again, if you don't have access to SPSS, then this is another way that you can do it, all right? So how I write this up, I say that there was a significant association between the group status and success rates, right? Here's my chi-squared statistic. In parentheses, I have my degrees of freedom, and then my sample size, and then the actual statistic. What's the actual value for that chi-squared? And then I'll indicate that the p-value was less than 0.05. And then I just write up a quick summary. The participants in group 2 were more likely to fail at the task than those in group 1. All right. Any questions or comments? I'm going to pause here for one moment. Then I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you all. And then I'm going to turn it over to Reem. So hopefully everyone is okay with this. I will be sure to get out notes from tonight so that you can see how we run through the actual numbers. Okay. Any questions? I'll check the chat. I don't see anything. Okay. All right. So now what I would like to do is introduce Reem Ayouby. She is just an amazing researcher, has extensive knowledge and background in advanced statistics. And she and I had the pleasure of talking very early in our sessions. And I was like, oh, you would be an amazing speaker. I love hearing about other people's research. And I thought that she would make an amazing speaker for this session, especially since we're talking about advanced stats. So I'm just gonna get out of the way and turn it over to Reem.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate this opportunity to share the tools I've been using. I've been using these tools for a long time. Don't be scared. You don't have to know the math that's under the hood. You can actually do a lot of this without knowing all the formulas that go into it. So I'm gonna start my presentation and share my screen. Sorry. And Oh, yeah, it switches the display. So I'll just take a moment to swap them back over, and then you should be seeing my presentation now. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today I'll be talking about advanced statistics, and I got into this basically because after working in industry for a few years as a Java developer and a database administrator, I got a chance to teach Java, and I really enjoyed that. So I went back to school and started my master's, and really enjoyed the research. So I kept going until I got my PhD. And my research has always focused on use at the heart of the research. So why do people decide to use a system? At the beginning, it was about using internet technologies, and then later on, it became more focused on social media. So that's my background, and I'd like to know how many people here have had the first two sessions, just to have an idea. If you could raise your hands. I actually can't see. I'm sorry. Can anyone tell me what the hand count is?
Hang on one moment. Let me see if I can. I can't seem to see. I don't see any hands up. Okay, I have one hand. Two. Anyone else? Okay, it just looks like two.
Okay, great. That's good. So it would have been nice to see the contrast between the different methods, but that's okay. You don't need to know the first part to be able to follow for the next part. And I'm wondering if someone can tell me how they create their user personas. Would anyone be happy to share a little bit about that process? No? Often we have an idea of what the user personas are. We may document them. I see someone has put their camera on. If you want to share, please just jump in. Oh, Sarah has her hand up. Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, so I create user personas through a variety of ways, but primarily I'm looking at behaviors and trying to understand through qualitative research their motivations, challenges, pain points, and things of that nature. But when it comes to behavior, for example, if it's for a product, I may segment based on the behavior of usage of that product. So how frequently are they? So looking at product usage metrics, for example, which features are they utilizing the most? What are they using it for? How frequently are they using it? So those are some ways of creating personas based on metrics or analytics behavior that might.
Oh, it's cut off.
I think we lost her. I don't know what happened.
Oh, I
okay,
lost my
it's good.
connection for a moment. I'm sorry
Okay.
about that.
Okay, did everyone hear what I had said about behavior-based personas based on analytics?
I heard a little bit that you look at their behavior, at the metrics, and then based on that, you formulate the personas. Is that correct?
I supplement it to the qualitative personas that might already exist.
Oh,
So
okay.
personas that have been built based on qualitative one-on-one interviews where I'm learning about motivations, background in terms of what are their pain points and challenges, what are their aspirations, those kinds of things. I will then supplement it with behavioral analytics in terms of the product metrics related to usage.
Awesome, very interesting. So it's a mixture of the qualitative and quantitative, and sounds pretty data-driven.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, great. So as we go, I think this may offer another data-driven approach potentially for the same process. So for today, the way it's gonna go is that we're gonna build on what we've seen so far, but even if you weren't here before, that's okay. You can use the visualizations and see how the different factors will change how we can see the way that two variables behave together. If you add a third one, how can we keep track of what's going on? And then if there are interactions in between them, also what's going on there. And I would like us to have a little breakout room activity for about 5 minutes so that you have a chance to play with those visualizations and discuss those. And then we'll look at the definition of what quantitative UX research is, just to kind of anchor us back down, and then move on to the advanced statistics and summary of the research I've done and the process that I've used to kind of illustrate the way we can use these advanced statistics. So first, I'd like to distinguish between function and feature. So a function is what needs to be done. And that can be very much related to, for people who were here before, the jobs to be done framework. And then a feature is really about how the app enables the user to get that job done. So just so that we're all on the same wavelength when it comes to these two words, because I think very often they're used interchangeably. So would anyone have like any comments about this? Okay, so an example from the A/B test is we saw that the same function can be performed in 2 different ways. And one way may work better than another way. So one feature may be better than another.
That work that I'm doing right now.
And so there we go. The function is exactly the same, just 2 different ways of doing it. And so this would be the feature. Okay, so for the visualizations, I'm gonna quickly just give you a little look at what that looks like. And then it's gonna be shared in the chat so that you can try them out during the breakout room. And during the breakout room, I'd like for us to take a few minutes, about 5 minutes, to discuss the limitations of the methods that we've seen so far. And are there any research questions that have come up for you at work that may make it impossible to only rely on those types of analyses, like including the ones in the visualizations? So then we can come back and discuss that a little bit. So I'm just going to take a moment and share my screen from my web browser where I have the visualizations. And so here we can see this is a correlation. And if we change the correlation, we can see how at a correlation of 0.7, there's a positive trend up. So if X increases, Y also increases. And we see the regression line here. And so that's one visualization that you can play around with. And then there is here, I hope you can see the second visualization, which is looking at two variables. So now it's not only in a flat plane, there's a third dimension, and we can manipulate the correlations. Oops, there are ones that don't work well. And see how the data would change. And so trying to visualize what it means if X increases by 1, X1 increases by 1, X2 increases by 1. What does that mean for Y in a three-dimensional space? Well, what if we want to add another variable? It starts to become a little bit difficult. And if we add an interaction term, it gets even more difficult. So how about we go into breakout rooms now, and we try this out and see how it works, and then what kinds of research questions can this answer for us, and we'll come back and share some of that. Very much. So would anyone like to share what their thoughts are given the visualizations and maybe the discussion around research questions?
I can ask a question. I'll put myself out there and be a little vulnerable.
Sounds good.
My understanding of correlation and regression is that it has to be done with continuous variables. Like you can't use it with dichotomous variables. So that would be a limitation. For example, if we were just trying to see something like if we had a variable that was binary or dichotomous, like a yes/no variable, then we might not be able to use these methods. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, unless you look at the probability of it occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So a probability of yes versus probability of Y, then yes, it's generally continuous variable. Yeah. Anything else that came up?
There was a comment in the chat.
Okay.
If you want to check that.
Oh, okay. Sarah was confused. Okay. Maybe it's because we had talked about correlation before. So correlation tells us if two variables move together, either if one is higher, the other one will also be higher. And if one drops, then the other one will drop also. So that's the correlation, but sometimes it's more than one variable. So let's say this is completely made up. As age gets higher, the people will want to use a certain product X, or a combination of age and maybe some other personality characteristic. If both of them go up, then a certain dependent variable will change in a similar way. And interaction effect is something that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So maybe I won't address that one right now, but it may be easier to see it when I explain it in my model. So is that okay for now? Okay, great, thanks. So one of the points is that when we start to visualize more than two independent variables, so two things that may influence an outcome, if we want to add a third, it starts to get really complex in terms of how we can visualize this, how well we can make sense of what's going on with the data. And sometimes we have lots of things to think about. So if we think about the jobs to be done framework, Michele had showed us how they did interviews to see what's needed by their potential clients. They came up with a very large list of more than 100 items, and then they rated those and came up with an opportunity score. And after that, they decided which ones of these jobs to be done functionalities they wanted to implement in their software. So we want to be able to include lots of things sometimes to see how well we're doing in terms of the resulting use and maybe other metrics that we keep track of. So I will go on to the next. So if we have some clients already, we have a product already, so we're not starting from scratch here. We've already done the qualitative research, the interviews, or other qualitative methods to decide what features we want to implement, what functionality the software is going to be used for, and we've started implementing it. And now we want to see, well, people are buying or making subscriptions. Are they subscribing at the minimum level for the free version, for example, or are they starting to upgrade their subscriptions to higher levels where it's paid levels? And obviously we want them to start upgrading their subscriptions, because that means that we're going to be doing better. So what kinds of questions might come up? Maybe why are some subscribers upgrading to the next level while others are not? And so this may touch on the personas that we have. Are the personas that we came up with our qualitative research actually what they are? Can we add some more nuance to them, like Sarah did in her research? And what can we do about these upgrades? If they're not happening, can we figure out why they're not happening? Can we make adjustments? Could it have to do maybe with the functionalities in our apps, maybe how they're perceived? And so there are lots of questions here that need to be answered. So going to the definition of quant UX research, I found this quote really helpful. So this is based on Mary and Gwen and Saida Bakshi and Alex Wentworth. So they are research scientists at Facebook, and they have come up with these questions. So for example, what are the motivations for using these products? And how are some people, how do some people perceive and use the product? How do they react emotionally and physically to it? and what do they like and dislike about these specific features, and so on. So if we take out the human motivations, perceived use, reactions, and likes and dislikes, well, I think we can often discern some of these through our qualitative research. So why quantitative research? Why would we want to use quantitative research to, again, revisit these ideas? Would anyone want to take a guess? Okay, so I'll answer in the interest of time. I'll answer my own question. So with qualitative research, we usually have small sample sizes. We can't interview hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people or thousands of people. So it's a small sample size. It may generalize to the wider population that we would like to have purchasing our product, but it may not generalize. Maria says maybe to get a sense of magnitude, strength of the relationship. Exactly. And to be able to generalize to the wider population that is our potential client. And so that's a good reason to use quantitative research. Obviously, there are things to do to make sure that it's going to generalize to the population we're actually interested in. So, for example, I'm going to share a very typical example that's used, a framework that's used in user experience research, and it's this perceived ease of use and perceived usefulness. And very often we focus on perceived ease of use. So how easy is our product to use? Are people not using it because it's too difficult? Or are there other reasons? Can we make it easier and more intuitive? But then there's also the perceived usefulness. And if we get the perceived ease of use right, then that takes away the hurdles for people to use it, but it still has to be useful. And for it to be useful, it needs to be perceived as having functionality that's useful. And with that, we can go into a lot of depth. And so this kind of model is a very typical model that's used in user research, often in academia, but also I have seen job requirements that ask for causal inference, and this is starting to get into the idea of causal inference. And so the idea is that when the perceived functionalities are there, that leads to perceived usefulness, which leads to use, which then would lead to an increase in subscription level. And so this is one type of framework, and I just want to highlight the dichotomy again between qualitative and quantitative. So this is taken from Chapman's presentation at Quant UXCon in June. And here at the extreme of quantitative user research, we're looking at regression models. So how many factors can we take into consideration, how those change and their impact on our variable of interest, often referred to as a dependent variable, multivariate statistics, and causal modeling. So this is kind of what I'm going to be getting into now. And I'm going to do this by using my research as an illustration. So in my research, I was very much interested in social media use and its impact on well-being. So I was looking for motives and perceived social media functionality and how that influences social media use. how social media affects an individual's well-being and how emotion regulation is involved in the outcome. And so I put together a research framework similar to the one we saw earlier, and it basically looks at the interaction between implicit motives and perceived social media functionality, and then also looking at explicit motives. So the difference between implicit motives and explicit motives is that implicit motives are motives we're not aware of at a conscious level, so we cannot state them verbally, but they drive impulsive behavior. And explicit motives are like goals. We're conscious of them and they drive planned behavior. And then social media use would be a result of these interacting, and well-being, I theorize that it would be a result of social media use, depending on a person's ability to regulate their emotions. And so I used a statistical method that's called PLS path modeling. So partial least squares path modeling is basically, it uses regression and correlation to see as the level of some variables goes up, does the rest of the model follow or not? And it also assesses mediation and moderation. So mediation is when, so this is a mediator, social media uses a mediator because it's between these independent variables and the dependent variable. And emotion regulation is a moderator, and it's because it changes the relationship between social media use and well-being. So if we, I will right away dive into the results of my research to give you an idea of what you can expect if you run these types of analyses. So with my research, I found at first it was a very bland outcome. I was shocked. It was like a mildly good relationship between Facebook use and well-being, which I measured using this brief inventory of thriving, which is a set of questions that has been validated by others beforehand. And so at first it was like very bland, and then I decided to segment the data. So the tool I use allows us to segment the data and optimize it on one of the dependent variables. So I optimized on the well-being construct, which is the brief inventory of thriving. And with that, I found that there were actually two groups. So one group had a very strong positive relationship between Facebook use and the well-being construct. And the other group had a negative relationship, although not that hard, like it wasn't as severely negative as the positive was positive. So for, let's say for each hour, there's standardized, everything gets standardized in these types of models. So it doesn't really matter what the unit of measurement is once all the analysis is done. But as Facebook rises, let's say with 1 unit, 1 standard deviation, the thriving construct or the well-being construct will also rise for this group. But for the other group, as the use rises, the well-being drops by 0.473. And the stars here mean that these are significant relationships. So with this, I could also compare the two groups. So even though at first it looked like there was no relationship between, this is the emotion regulation, MODDERS, is the modified difficulties in emotion regulation scale. So with that scale, we could measure people's difficulties managing their emotions. And with that, it was very clear that there are significant differences between the two groups. Even though each group, we saw no relationship there, but between one and the other, there is a difference. And the difference is that in the group that has negative outcomes, their emotions get involved in their Facebook use, and that influences the negative outcome. So I thought that was kind of insightful in terms of how Facebook use interacts with emotions and results in the well-being construct. So this is at the very last stages of the model. So what's happening before is very similar, but we can see here that the group that has positive outcomes, their explicit motives are driving their behavior a little bit and moderating how their behavior, so they don't get as sucked into Facebook use, let's say, as the other group, which is more in a reactionary and emotional state. So with the perceived Facebook functionality measure, I could dig in even deeper. And so there's a lot other things to unpack here, but I'm going to focus on this because I find that this next part is interesting. So I had lots of measures that made up this Facebook functionality perception or perceived Facebook functionality. And they were in these dimensions. So relationships, sharing, persona, presence, and entertaining, learning, and transactional. So each one had multiple questions, and there's another layer of detail that I won't get into now. But with the people who end up with positive impacts from their Facebook use, their perceptions tend to be kind of spread out along these dimensions. But with the other group, they're really focused on two dimensions, on the entertaining and the learning. And they're kind of maybe overestimating how useful Facebook is for learning and how useful it really is for entertaining, because it's obviously not giving them very good outcomes. So maybe I'll take a little pause here and see if anyone has questions. Okay, so based on this, I came up with some recommendations. So for example, I don't work for Facebook, but if I were to make suggestions, I would say maybe give some feedback to the people who may be having negative impacts. And from what we've heard from some whistleblowers is that Facebook is aware of maybe who those people are or can become aware. So maybe help them notice emotional use and add more psychoeducational content to their feed to help support them and bring awareness to them. And maybe also from what we've seen in the group that has positive outcomes, maybe we can learn and share that knowledge. So I was surprised by these results, but that's what the data said. And so let's see, any questions at this point? Okay, I see something in the chat. This can apply to LinkedIn too, very possibly. Yes, I know it's really kind of exhausting seeing the layoff announcements. I agree, it's emotionally draining in a way because it creates more anxiety. So it would be super interesting to do this research on LinkedIn. I don't think I'm going to be the one doing it, but I would definitely be happy to support anyone who wants to do it. So we're starting to run out of time. I had more slides to share, But the idea is that if others are interested, I would be happy to do more along these lines in the future, like to share this method, to show you the process that I used. I can quickly flip through some of my slides to show you like the general process. It looks long, but it doesn't have to get that long because it's going to be iterative in an organization. You get to know what's going on. You have your measures can be adapted from jobs to be done, for example, or other sources internally. And then I could show the factor analysis, how it's done, how I came up with these different factors, what they mean, what the tool looks like when we actually look at the tool that I used. There are other tools also. This is one way of, this is one of the models that I did to get to that final model. And then how to create a measure or a metric, and we can go over questions. And finally, I think my last slide is, what would you like to learn more about? There's this PLS path modeling, other usage metrics, how do we come up with them, effect size, what does that mean, and mediation and interaction effects, what are those exactly? And then it's endless, right? There's so much that we can do, and I'm super interested in all of these topics and would love to share. Okay, effect size, mediation effects, and confidence intervals. Great. Okay, Michele is interested in all of these topics. Okay, great. That's great to know. So maybe we'll do a poll or some sort of survey to find out who's interested in what, and we can get something together. I will stop my share now.
Reem, thank you so much. I mean, I can hear the passion with which you approach your research, and I'm just so excited that you're here. And just like looking at the comments, just like, yes, please, yes, have a guild group. So I think we're kind of recruiting you for a guild group on advanced statistics. And when we talked earlier, you said you would be interested. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have not registered for anything on the Luma site, please go on, get us your contact information, join the links, stay in touch with us, because at the new year, we will have some additional courses, and Reem's will be one of them, okay? So please stay in touch with us. We are just so excited that you were here tonight, and I can't thank you enough, Reem. I mean, you just made my day. Anytime we could hear about research, I'm thrilled, so.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to go into details when the time comes, and happy to chat over Slack also if anyone would like to do that. So yeah.
Fantastic. I am going to ask Raymond, would you like to have some final words? Our founder.
Okay. Wow, Reem, what an inspiration. It was great to see your work and see, the complexity of the stats, but how that, helped you answer these real world questions, how was Facebook affecting people?
Thank you.
Really awesome. And like Michele said, your passion for it is just, flows from your presentation. So thank you for bringing that to us, right? We all have a little more passion because it's contagious. So it would be awesome if you, were willing to do something next year. Anyway, no, just my thanks. As Michele said, there are other groups meeting. Feel free to look and see if one fits your interests. And thank you for coming. This is, what we're trying to do is build community and share expertise.
My pleasure. And I benefited from the earlier sessions also with Michele. Like, I'll definitely be using that flowchart that you shared, because not everything needs to be complex, right? We definitely want to have the lighter research questions as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we see some chats in the comments and we'll be sure to address those. So please stay in touch. Don't forget about us, stay connected, and we will be back and answering your questions. Have a great night, everyone.